And we are back with another episode of Pragmatic Optimists. Today, we're going to be talking about the birthright citizenship case that was agreed to be heard in front of the Supreme Court. I'm attorney Rachel Cohen. I'm joined by Rhode Island State Senator Tiara Mack. And I would love to be able to get into kind of a detailed legal analysis of the birthright citizenship case, but this is not legal advice. My attorney opinion is that all of this is bullshit. It is unlikely that the Supreme Court rolls back birthright citizenship, that there are ways that they could come up with insane limitations. And what I want to talk about in the context of the birthright citizenship case instead is two things. Number one, how the narrative is going to get hijacked and why I think they took the case to be able to come up and say, look, we're not in Trump's pocket. Sometimes we still strike down things that the Trump administration does. And then why it should have never been in front of the Supreme Court at all and what it says about the state of our court system, that the birthright citizenship case is there. So just very, very high level, birthright citizenship was established under the 14th Amendment as a mechanism to make sure that Black people newly freed who had not been citizens under the structures of American law previously did have full citizenship. And what it does, it's relatively rare in an international context, birthright citizenship. I think there's something like 30 countries that have it. It means that no matter the citizenship status of your parents, if you're born on American soil, you are an American citizen. And it's been a huge target of kind of rightward attacks because it is relatively rare in the international scale, in the international sphere, and also because, of racism. And so we have seen increased attacks in this administration and in Trump rhetoric broadly. I think that plenty of the kind of birtherism targeted racist attacks on Barack Obama were fundamentally rooted in real rejection of birthright citizenship more than almost anything else. Though at the time, now 10 plus years ago, 15 years ago, that was not something that could be said aloud. And so the kind of shift over what can be said and what might be an appropriate thing to attack as a legal or foundational structure of the United States has moved significantly, which in turn is my issue with this being in front of the Supreme Court at all. This is in the Constitution. There is a 1989 case, it's so far back that I don't say the years aloud very often. There's an 1898 case that made clear that the kind of birthright citizenship of the 14th Amendment extended to, it was a Chinese immigrant or the son of Chinese immigrants who had brought the case. And so that it extended beyond formerly enslaved people. And it hasn't really been touched since then because the language is very clear, the law is very settled, and things like that should not be in front of the Supreme Court. And so when we see cases like this go in front of the court, I'm never going to put anything past the not just Trump appointed judges, but I'm never going to put anything past Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, in terms of their willingness to throw out incredibly settled foundational law for the sake of making minorities' lives harder, herein including the Dobbs opinion that overturned Roe and attacks on women. We also, and people with uteruses, we also see this happen over and over again with the LGBTQ community, and we talked about it on here. But I do think that this is a particularly difficult one. I think that we will see people dissent. I think that this is not going to be 9-0, which is insane. But I don't see John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett joining, even Neil Gorsuch. I don't see them joining a rollback of birthright citizenship altogether. I don't want to dismiss anyone's fears about the possible outcomes of this case, because this is an incredibly terrifying time to be anyone other than a very specific genre of white person in this country. But I think it's unlikely that we see. It's also just even beyond how settled the law is, it would be completely impossible to enforce. And I think that even maybe somebody like Kavanaugh would recognize that is not something that you could go out and determine, what do we do about people that have pre-existing birthright citizenship? And most attorneys would say, well, that's not what this would impact anyway. That's not how the law works. And to them, I say, are we watching the same thing? Are we watching the same country? Are we watching? There is no reliable notion of law in this country in this moment. So that's my summary. The issue is the legitimacy of taking this case at all and allowing it to be argued in front of the Supreme Court, less so what I think the possible outcomes are. And Tiara, what are the ways over the course of both of our lives, our time spent together as organizers, that you have seen rhetoric about birthright citizenship and immigration change? And what are the impacts of that beyond a case like this birthright citizenship case, and more broadly in terms of where we are as a country because we accept these premises?
Yeah. So Rachel, the first question I have, it might be for you, is I have heard this term and it's like gotten even more airtime, and more people are saying, well, people are just coming to our country with their anchor babies, and they're coming here giving birth, all of these immigrants, just so they can have someone, even if not themselves, that ties them to this great American dream. And that people only come to this country not for the abundance of opportunities, not because we've destabilized their regions and because we've created conflicts and authoritarian regimes, mostly in Central, South America, the Caribbean, and also abroad in many other countries where we've destabilized those regions. And they're not fleeing for those very valid and real reasons that are of our own making, but they're coming here explicitly to have children that can anchor them as American citizens. And I think that is one of, I know you're trying to placate all of our worries, and you're trying to assuage some of those concerns that we have. But when I hear there's not much to worry about, I'm like, well, actually, this country that we are now in is radically different than the one that we were in a year ago. And the rhetoric, especially on the right, and especially for anti-immigrant folks who see and praise ICE, and who are the ones who are loudly saying this is exactly what this country needs right now, because we only need the good immigrants, or we only need my grandparents, and after that generation of immigrants has been here, we're all Americans and no one else gets to be here. So what do you think the role of some of the rhetoric around the anchor baby, or the only coming to the United States to be able to have something or someone to tether them to this country does to kind of create on the right, the message that we must prevent anyone from either coming to our country, or something that we've seen in many, many, many iterations of American history, whether it was the American Indians, Black and Brown people, the Taino communities in Puerto Rico, forced sterilization and or hostile reproductive rights, which we've already seen for American citizens, but we will continue to see either forced sterilization, increased maternal and fetal attacks for immigrant communities, because we are explicitly prohibiting them and or creating fear around them bringing in a new generation. And so those are some of my fears, is that we've created this narrative, and we also have the policy both for American citizens and for those who are in our country that is hostile for reproductive health. And are those some real fears, or are you seeing that replicated in policy that could attack anyone coming to our country and giving birth?
I think it's such a good frame, and it's making me put a fine point on what I mean when I say I don't think this is a thing to be particularly concerned about. I mean specifically the outcome of this Supreme Court case, because everything that you just said is already happening and will continue to happen, right? And I think that there's a lot of things that I want to put fine points on. Our viewers, this may be a slightly longer video because immigration law is something that I'm very passionate about and have been for a long time. But this reminds me of the Kim Davis Obergefell cert petition that we've talked about on here. And it is a mechanism that we've seen from this administration and from this Supreme Court specifically a number of times, where it's kind of sleight of hand. And it's like, oh, here's this thing that is very simple to understand, and so is going to get picked up by a bunch of major news sources, and you're going to get really worried about it, and people are going to tell you that the sky is falling, and then we're not going to do it. The sky's not falling. Everything's fine. While in reality, all of those things are not only happening in the background anyway, but have been for a really, really long time. And so I think that the rhetoric around anchor babies that you used just now is exactly right, because this notion of a quote unquote anchor baby, just this racist bullshit, doesn't exist. You don't have an easier pathway to citizenship or to legal status in this country because you have an American citizen infant. And what happens instead is that we're seeing small American children, like literal American citizens, deported because their parents do not have legal status in this country. And while there is, I want to be very, very careful but to make sure that I'm giving y'all accurate information, there is a pathway where ultimately an American citizen can petition to have their parents be citizens and have this kind of family reunification where their parents can come in. You have to be 18, and your parents are the lowest priority individuals that siblings of Americans, like they're not the lowest priority individuals, but they're very low. It's not the same pathway as petitioning to have a spouse have a pathway to citizenship in this country. It is impacted if there are pre-existing immigration convictions or if the person has been deported before. There is not a clear pathway. And even to the extent that a pathway exists, it does not kick in until you are an adult. And so this is not something that people are doing for the sake of having an easier pathway to American citizenship down the line. People are coming to this country for the kind of destabilizing reasons that you've already named that are often driven by American policies like the ones that we see drone striking Venezuelan boats right now that destabilize people's home countries. People come here, they build lives, they happen to have children, and those children do not give them an easier pathway to remaining in this country on any kind of reasonable timeline where that is a consideration of people. And so what we're seeing is this kind of belief that something is being eliminated, that it's going to be harder for people, that it's going to be easier to deport people if birthright citizenship is because birthright citizenship impacts a bunch of people other than, the people who are American citizens by nature of birth. And it's not true. And we are already seeing these kinds of increased deportations that are happening independently of what the Supreme Court is doing, because they're really happening extrajudicially. They're happening outside of the bounds of what is supposed to happen in this system. Donald Trump is firing immigration judges. He is sending Proud Boys without training out into cities across the country to grab people who look Latino off the streets. You have Vasquez Perdomo, the case that we've talked about a number of times that functionally legalizes racial profiling and immigration enforcement, Joe Arpaio style. And so the fears are incredibly legitimate. It's just that this is not going to be the vehicle to the expansion of disappearances, in my opinion. But that's not because I think those aren't going to happen. It's because I think they're already happening. And so I think that this is already, run a little bit long, but I wanted this legal pathway stuff. Donald Trump's USCIS put out a memo last week saying that they are pausing asylum across the board, justifying it because of this one attack that, tragic attack that we've seen of National Guards members by an Afghan national, and using that to block asylum applications, 589 applications, for people from every country, using it to reassess past immigration grants under the Biden administration for people from a list of target countries. Those are the mechanisms. And why I say it's like the Kim Davis Obergefell case, it's like everyone's talking about this Kim Davis Obergefell case that was never going to be in front of the Supreme Court, that was not granted cert. And when it wasn't granted cert, people were celebrating that as a victory, when the actual case that is going to restrict LGBTQ rights this session has already been granted cert and is going to be argued. It's called Little v. Hecox. It's focused on trans athletes. And I have said many times, but I continue to keep us focused on it because that is going to be the pathway to restricting rights for LGBTQ Americans broadly because of what they're being asked to consider about equal protection. And so I think that the birthright citizenship case is the same genre where it's getting all of the attention, it's sucking all the air out of the room when it is a very unlikely vehicle because it makes no sense. And that's not me saying, so the fears about this mean that the fears broadly are not justified. I'm saying, let's not even really spend a ton of time on this, because it's not going to be the vehicle for these worst case scenarios, because the worst case scenarios are already happening and will continue to happen. And if we spend a bunch of time and energy collectively focusing our attention on this case that should never have been in front of the Supreme Court in the first place, instead of showing up and getting trained for ICE rapid response because Latino people are being sent to concentration camps regardless of whether or not they were born in this country sometimes. And the Supreme Court has already rubber stamped that as acceptable through Vasquez Perdomo. We miss kind of the mark of what's happening,
Right. And this administration is so good at making us look over here while all of this is happening. And it can be so addicting because the news cycle is also not training us to ask the question. They want us to pay attention to this so that we're not paying attention to what they are really doing. And so I hope some of our listeners are really taking what you were saying is, we already have the threats and they're already here. They're forcing us to look at this one case as the end all be all of immigration. And the news cycle is saying, this is the one case. But really, we have all of these other administrative ways that some of the catastrophic outcomes that they are saying might happen are actually already happening in many communities.
Yep. And I am going to write this up on Substack now that we've had the conversation, because I think this kind of Supreme Court sleight of hand, I strongly suspect, I was talking about it. I'm actually in Puerto Rico right now. I'm about to head to the airport because I had a wedding here this week and I was here with a couple of other attorneys. And last night, they both agreed with me and said, yes, there might be like some weird restrictions, but ultimately, court's not going to do it and it's going to be celebrated as a victory, when in reality, this is not a battle that we're fighting, the same as Obergefell. And then they also, I think worth naming, this is a lot of pessimism, but I'll bring it back to optimism in 1 second. We're walking around the streets of Puerto Rico, a part of the United States that is experiencing ongoing colonization, right? That has been experiencing ongoing colonization by the United States the whole time we've been alive, that has been left behind, that cannot vote for president, that is functionally an occupied territory, while also we have people talking about, we have Kristi Noem and DHS talking about how they want ICE agents outside of Puerto Rican artist Bad Bunny's Super Bowl halftime show performance, as if Puerto Ricans are deportable, and kind of lumping together people who are occupied by the United States with like the broader Latinx community or Latine community that's being targeted. And it is just total misunderstanding of where we're already at in this country. It's like a sanitization, not of history, not of what might happen or what Trump wants to happen, but it's a sanitization of what is actually already happening, has been happening throughout our lifetimes under administrations of Democrat and Republican presidents and control. And what the optimism I'd like to leave you with is that I think that there are a lot of people who are realizing that they need to look outside this kind of stripped back, the way that the media will cover this. I don't even want to blame specific journalists because we have these understaffed newsrooms that are controlled in large part by billionaires and corporate media, and that have laid off so many people. So it is impossible to do the appropriate deep dive. It's impossible for a lot of these places to pay people who are attorneys who have expertise in these areas to fully break it down and explain them. And so some of the inaccurate or misrepresentative one-off reporting comes because people do not have time, resources, energy to really dig into this, to really explain it. And we've had to ask kind of everyone in the entire fucking country to become an expert in media literacy and to figure out who's trustworthy and who's not, and to understand that many of the people that are doing this kind of analysis, like me and you, that we are doing it largely in our own corners, that we don't have fact checkers. So even when you find people that you trust, you have to be thinking really critically about the information that you're getting. And so that's very hard. But I do think the people that are choosing to do it, like our viewers, I am so optimistic by the number of people that are choosing to push themselves to question the narratives that they have been fed and that are continuing to be fed to them by media broadly, not just corporate media, and to plug into their communities and kind of build up their own understanding of the world, and to join rapid response, to reject ideas about what this country could be, because I think that's many of the narratives we get about the United States are really, we're being told that what we could be, what we should be, is what we already are. And I'm seeing so many people realize we are not that as a country, but we could be and we should be. And how do we plug into our communities and organize and support our neighbors to make that effective and to make that reality? And so I'm going to leave you there. Follow along with Legal AF on YouTube, on Substack. As stated, I'm going to lock myself in to writing a Substack that lays all of this out, that is a little bit more concise, that you can share with people on the birthright citizenship case. And Tiara and I will be back to keep breaking these things down with you here on Legal AF on the Midas Touch Network. Bye, y'all.
Bye, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.